Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. Well, it's a 2 for Tuesday, and this is the first of 2 streams we're doing today. A couple of changes to announce, or a couple of new things. First of all, is there a new mic? Sure. But we also have monetization that I'm trying to get started. That includes memberships and super chats. So if you want to make this a functioning business and more to your benefit, if you are interested in some exclusive member perks such as custom gifts that you can use in chat, consider a membership or consider just a straight up super chat, in which case I'll read it and go, oh my gosh, actual leafy green folding money. We got a couple of items in the news. First of all, the absolute bias apparent in the handling of the Tyre Nichols killing. The majority report also did a great job of highlighting exactly what Republicans intend to do about the situation with policing. They made it in the United States. They made it clear in a recent interview given by Jim Jordan. And that is, of course, nothing. I have my own comments to add on that, however. Then Trump pleads the Fifth over and over and over in a civil suit with New York Attorney General Letitia James. We go into what that means because it has some criminal implications. It also it shows us why our current system is designed to give rich people a pass. And then a rare disagreement with Ring of Fire. Farron Cousins talked about gerrymandering yesterday. So did we. And there was 2 very different messages. Farron Cousins saying, you can't fight it. I respectfully but heartily disagree. And we're going to go into the details on that. Folks, let's jump right into it. So the majority report recently discussed the Tyre Nichols case. And they looked at a clip of Jim Jordan talking about it and discussing what the Republican response will be. It is every bit as loathsome as you might imagine. Let's jump right in.
Still incredibly disturbed about what we saw Friday. I guess it was Friday night when the Tyre Nichols video was released, and just absolutely brutal. And it has, for the moment, at least, revived some of the energy that was in this country in 2020 in terms of some motivation to legislate and provide some oversight for police forces around this country.
I do want to jump in with one thing before they get started. And I know there are some that prefer to watch the whole clip uninterrupted for a number of reasons I can't. One being getting copyright strikes, making it not apparent that it's the whole making it apparent that I'm not just reposting something someone else, I'm doing commentary on. Thing number 2 is I can't help myself. Apologies, I got to get in there. So he's let's go back and let him play that in again.
In terms of some motivation to legislate and provide some oversight.
Okay, what was the legislation? What was the oversight? It was scattershot. This is an issue I have with the Black Lives Matter organizers. I think they do a great job. And by the way, I think their efforts overall are heroic. I think they do a great job of getting the message out that there is inequity and that something must be done about it. What specifically? It's not in the common parlance. It's not understood by most of the people that support them, what exactly they're driving at. That's a problem. What's the point then? That is so often an issue on the left, is there is not a clear course of action, which means we're not really advocating for anything. We're advocating against the way things are. There's a big difference there. One thing is actionable, the other is just unfortunate. We got to change that up.
For police forces around this country. And recall that during the 2020 election, general election, Joe Biden was talking about increasing federal oversight of these police forces because time and time again we see this problem exists. The level of brutality, just the functioning of police in general. I mean, we've said this for years now. There's no reason for police to be doing any type of traffic stops whatsoever. No. There's just simply no reason.
Let alone a scorpion force, which is what has had to be disbanded. It's like a high crime task force, which, by the way, that was a very similar force as what killed Eric Garner here in New York. De Blasio did away with it, and then, of course, Eric Adams reinstated it.
Right. These things, there should be a wide slate of what the police do today that should be essentially pulled from their portfolio and given to other agencies and personnel who can do this. We have people who ticket cars when they're parking. The meter violation has superseded.
Okay, what he just said is defund the police. The phrase defund the police came about to try, the goal was admirable. It was an attempt to make an idea like that memorable and quick to say and catchy. This is good. This is a good intention. Terrible execution. Does anybody inherently know, when you first heard that just then, did you know he was talking about defund the police? When you say on CNN, where centrists gather, when you say on MSNBC, where a lot of centrists are going to get their news, we want to defund the police. Are they hearing take those responsibilities and shift them to other organizations? No, they're not. They're saying they're hearing take money away from the police. Get rid of police. That's what they're hearing. That's a problem. Black Lives Matter, as the people who are now the name of a movement, have a responsibility, I feel, to get better with their messaging, to be clearer and to direct better. But don't worry, we're about to hear who the bad guys are with clarity. It's not just a matter of having insufficient or inadequate good guys. There is a definite villain in this story.
There's no reason why we would need, officers with guns to go up to people and challenge them when their parking meter is overrun.
True.
And there's really no reason why we need to do that if you have a moving violation. We don't.
In short, every time somebody jumps up and says, it's time to defund the police, they need to follow that with, in fact, if we don't just kill that phrase altogether and say the same thing with a more acceptable phrase, they need to follow it with, there's no reason the parking meter enforcer needs to be armed. We can still have enforcement of our laws through nonviolent means. Most laws that are broken do not require a firearm nearby to be dealt with. You can write a simple ticket. We need other law enforcement organizations than just our police. Even be sympathetic towards police, which I happen to be. You can say our police are overworked. They're acting like animals because they're treated like animals. Our police need help, so let's help them. And you don't help them by giving them more and more to do and arming them more and more inappropriately with military equipment for the tasks they're being assigned. No. Take the funding we're pouring into police and spread it out. How about this? Diversify policing. At the very least, even if it's not clear on its own what that's referring to, at the very least, it's harder to misinterpret that as a bad thing.
But that's where we're at. I mean, among other things. But here is on, what was it? Chuck Todd's show, Meet the Press, interviewing Representative Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio. Imagine if this standard that he is propagating was to be applied to all of the things that are criminal in this country.
Yeah.
What action would you like to see Congress take?
Well, I don't know that there's any law that can stop that evil that we saw. That is just, just difficult to watch. What strikes me is just a lack of respect for human life.
They're going to talk about it as well, but let's just pause it, what he just said, because he's going to open and close with it. I don't know that there's any law that can stop that. I don't know that there's any law. In other words, Chuck Todd, who's quite weak, says, "What are you going to do about this?" Chair of the Judiciary Committee. Jim Jordan, Republican, says nothing. We're going to do nothing. He is a lawmaker, and he is saying we will do nothing to stop this. Folks, first of all, if you are a black person who votes Republican, here's why you should not. If you are a white person who votes Republican, and you happen to think that the color of your skin shouldn't be a factor in how you are treated by police, because you're a decent human being, here's why you should not. Crazy that he would have the gall to say that outright. He's just trying to rip the Band-Aid off. We already know, and he knows we know. The American public knows Republicans will not do anything about this. And their previous attempts to pretend like they're going to have resulted in the public either expecting them to do something they don't really want to do, or it's resulted in just more work as they try to do something that is intentionally inconsequential because they said they would. Pathetic.
So I don't know that any law, any training, any reform is going to change. This man was handcuffed. They continued to beat him. And I was actually reminded, it's hard to watch the whole thing, but as I watched it, I was reminded of when we had a hearing probably 2 years ago when George Floyd's brother came and testified in front of the Judiciary Committee. And it was one of those moments where...
Take his name out of your mouth. That is the very person up there. It's the very person who contributed to George Floyd's death. He's talking about his brother now, trying to use him to help propagate the system that caused George Floyd's death. That guy.
Fact and truth and emotion all came together. And he said something at hearings, actually during the questioning portion of the hearing, he said, life is precious. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments that grabbed everyone in that hearing, both parties.
But didn't affect you, clearly.
And the fact that we saw that these 5 individuals did not have any respect for life. And again, I don't think these 5 guys represent the vast majority of law enforcement. But I don't know if there's anything you can do to stop the kind of evil we saw in that video.
So
it's 6 now, for the record. It's now 6. The cop that used the taser, the white guy. Wouldn't you know it took him longer to charge him?
I mean, imagine the idea that someone was talking about, just murder in general and go like, no respect for life. know how you can legislate.
Abortion. We can't do anything about abortion then, right? If abortion is murder, it's just, sometimes people are going to do those kinds of things. There's no use for you in government then, Jim Jordan, if there's no way to legislate these kinds of things.
And understand, of course there is.
Yeah.
Of course there is.
Those cops were there because of a law.
Of course there is. I mean, we could just not allow the development of these type of forces, of these type of like squads. I mean, just as the most basic rudimentary starting point. The fact that they got rid of it is indicative of what you could do in every city around the country. You want federal funding? There is no squads like that. That's where you could start. And that, honestly, that is the most sort of like rudimentary, insufficient response to this. But everything he is doing is designed in the same way, like he listened to George Floyd's brother, and the only thing he came around with is like, you have to respect life. And that's what inspired us to do absolutely nothing in terms of police reform. That's what got us to actually, we all just simply agreed on that and felt like job well done for us today.
Why do we have murder laws if all people need to do is just have a deep internalized respect for life? The reason we get people to respect others' lives and humanity is because we legislate and ensure and put guardrails in place to ensure that the kinds of things don't happen.
Okay, so love the majority report. I think they did, as always, a fantastic job. I do think we are in danger of the same thing happening again. And I also think we are in danger of exhaustion as a result of this. What happened last time? Where is the massive reform that stopped this from happening as a result of George Floyd's death? What happened? We were scattershot. Bunch of people calling for a bunch of different things that allowed politicians who did not want to do anything, who wanted to avoid the issue and let people go on being killed rather than face any sort of political pressure, rather than give up their fat contributions. What did we do instead? It allowed them to pick and choose what they would support and half-heartedly support it. It allowed them to say, well, I'm not going to defund the police because I'm going to instead fund more de-escalation programs and yada, yada, yada. One thing. We need to narrow it down to one thing. Who's going to narrow it down? Is your old pal Jake going to narrow it down? Well, I don't have the audience. I cannot. In fact, if I was as big as the majority report, I still wouldn't have the audience. That's not a practical solution. What is a practical solution? Contacting your Black Lives Matter chapter. There's a chapter, I think, in every state. I have contact links, not for every state, but for Black Lives Matter generally in the description. And you can simply search on a search engine, Black Lives Matter, your state name, chapter, contact. I have instructions for that, I believe, in the description as well. Contact them and tell them you want them to focus. Tell them pick one issue that will help. One issue, and make that the sole focus. It would certainly make it easier if we could point to these 6 officers now who are going to face charges over this and tie them to that issue. I would recommend, personally, a federal database for police misconduct. 23% of officers who are fired from one department for police misconduct in the vein of this that has caused the George Floyd's death, that caused Keenan Anderson's death, that caused Tyre Nichols' death. We shall find out if those last 2 cases bear out in court. But the behavior of police officers like that, if they get fired from one department, 23% of them get rehired in another department, and you wonder why we keep seeing this problem over and over again. That's why. That's one of the reasons, I should say. And it's not satisfying to say, oh, well, we're going to do this and then another thing and then another thing. It's so satisfying to say, we're going to do it all now. Well, that approach did not work. Look at how much energy was poured into the George Floyd protests. What national reforms did we get? So contact your state's Black Lives Matter chapter. They are very similar to your representative. They are a representative of you in this matter. Tell them what you want. Tell them to focus their efforts into one issue so that we can make it clear. We can make every person in Congress, we can make the president say yes or no to the protests as a whole. Force them to pick a side. Oh, man. Shouldn't start with the things I get most fired up about. Boy, howdy. Let's do a palate cleanser. New York Attorney General Letitia James started a civil suit against Trump. Here he is in deposition, pleading the fifth repeatedly. This is a video from the AP.
Is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I once asked, if you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? I was asking that question. Now I know the answer to that question. When your family, your company, and all the people in your orbit have become the targets of an unfounded, politically motivated witch hunt supported by lawyers, prosecutors, and even the fake news media.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if one of the people he was teasing for taking the fifth had given that as an answer? It's an unfounded, politically motivated investigation. Incidentally, it happens to be true most of the time when Republicans are doing it. Oh, this guy's so two-faced. And the people that think he's anything other than a con artist are just deluded.
You really have no choice. Anyone in my position not taking the Fifth Amendment would be a fool, an absolute fool. Accordingly, under the advice of my counsel and for all of the above reasons, I respectfully decline to answer the questions under the rights and privileges afforded to every citizen under the United States Constitution. This will be my answer to any further questions.
So the 2020 Statement of Financial Condition contained false and misleading valuations and statements. Is that correct?
Same answer.
You knew at the time it was finalized that the 2020 Statement of Financial Condition contained false and misleading statements. Is that correct?
Same answer.
Remember, this is a civil case. Him pleading the fifth here can be used against him in the judgment for this case. It can't in a criminal case. So why plead the fifth in this case? Because he's more afraid of criminal charges, and he's not afraid of losing some money in this. In other words, the operation he's using can consider this the operation he was running that appears to have been illegal, that generated millions and millions of dollars. It can afford to take that hit. He can throw this case. In other words, trying to regulate these people with civil suits it's nonsense. It does not work. It only works if this is taken to a criminal court, which is where we need to get this guy.
In preparing the 2020 Statement of Financial Condition, Alan Weisselberg, Jeff McConney, and others worked at your direction and followed your instructions to inflate asset valuations on the Statement of Financial Condition by employing false or misleading assumptions. Is that correct?
Same answer.
Is that your signature on page 2?
Same answer.
With regards to your old post office property, Is it correct that through the use of the inflated state...
Let me see his eyes go up again at that. Looky there. Remember the old post office property? Kind of curious what happened there. A Miami-based group that does business internationally bought it for way too much money. There's a lot of speculation around how they even intend to make a profit with how much they bought it for. Wonder why they did that. Incidentally, Trump was about to lose his shirt on that property. And I find it interesting as he snaps to attention when he's asked about it, and then goes back to not giving a damn when it's a nonsense question, or not a nonsense question, but doesn't involve fraud. The word Russian doesn't come up at all.
With regards to your old post office property, is it correct that through the use of the inflated statement of financial condition to obtain a favorable interest rate, you were able to save at least 5% per annum in interest payments on the construction loan of up to $170 million from Deutsche Bank?
Same answer.
Is it correct that absent the $170 million construction loan from Deutsche Bank, you would not have obtained the ground lease on the old post office property or been able to provide the renovation to the property that occurred?
Same answer.
That loan that he took, he should have lost big on all of that. I would love for further investigations to peel back a little bit more on that. Let's look at what CNN was saying about it in an online article. A video of the August deposition of the New York Attorney General's office took a video of the deposition the New York Attorney General's office took of former President Donald Trump, in which Trump invoked the Fifth Amendment and declined to answer questions, was released on 2 for Tuesday. Anyone in my position not taking the Fifth Amendment would be a fool, an absolute fool. Well, we got to agree there. You do appear to be very guilty. Trump was deposed as part of New York Attorney General Letitia James's civil investigation into the Trump Organization's business practices, which culminated in a lawsuit filed by James in September against Trump, some of his children, and executives of his business. It does continue. Let's have a gander. Trump read a lengthy statement calling James's investigation the greatest witch hunt in the history of our country. He said that he would be asserting his constitutional rights to not answer questions about the deposition. Remember, civil lawsuit. Him pleading the Fifth can be used against him. Ought to be used against him. In deciding that case, he cares less about the money. For Trump, for any big corporation that knows, for Trump and Trump Org, and then for any big corporation, for any billionaire, for any rich person who is unduly rich in this country, they know that getting a civil suit's just the cost of doing business. They have no shame about pleading the Fifth in these things, and they don't mind losing them as long as they write their check, which is less than the profits they made doing the illegal thing. Then they go about their business, knowing damn well there's not going to be any real legal consequences against them. Till recently, at the very least, Weisselberg's and Rikers, it's a start. His rambling opening statement ran through accusations James was investigating him for political reasons and included swipes at Michael Cohen, the former Trump lawyer whose congressional testimony about his business practices that started the Attorney General's probe. He also referenced the FBI's search of his Mar-a-Lago home, which occurred 2 days before the August 10 deposition. What a wacko. So what can we do about this? Real simple. Keep putting pressure on Merrick Garland, and as we have seen, our state attorney generals are more reliable than Merrick Garland. So there's the Department of Justice contact link in the description. Take advantage of it. Tell him for any any of the plethora of crimes Trump appears to have done, you would like to hear that charges are forthcoming. If you live in one of the states that had fake electors that did not, let's see if I can get that up there, that have yet to open investigations into it, that includes Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, contact your attorney general. Link is very much in the description. Contact them and say, Merrick Garland hasn't protected democracy. We've already had an election go by with fake electors on the ballot. Some of them got elected again. These are traitors. I want you, my state's attorney general, to take action. Open a state investigation into the fake elector case. Getting this man in front of a judge is priority number one. A real judge in criminal court. Priority number one. This civil litigation nonsense, its only value, its only real value, is in what he accidentally says under oath. And he knows that. So he's pleading the fifth because he can afford to lose a civil suit. Don't rely on that. Force him to pay for all of his crimes, just like anybody else would have to. Anybody else would have to. It is time to live in a country where the law is justly applied, where it is fairly applied. Well, continuing our theme of the laws unfairly applied, I disagree with Farron Cousins. Normally, I think this guy hits it right out of the park, but his most recent video on gerrymandering, which was done shortly after our video on gerrymandering, I'm apparently using the royal we now, after the Wicked video on gerrymandering. I mean, I just couldn't disagree with it more. Let's hear him get started. He starts off great, and then, boy, does it go downhill.
Dear Farron, shortly after the election in November, a New York Democrat said the reason we lost the 4 districts was because of gerrymandering. Is this true? How could they not have known that would happen? How can we end this toxic practice after every census? Gerrymandering is something that, of course, is as old as the United States itself is. And that is definitely a problem. We have had Supreme Court rulings. We've had state Supreme Court rulings. We have had changes to the way things are done, changes again once a Democrat or Republican takes over from the previous Democrat or Republican. So how do we end this toxic practice? Honestly, I don't think we can. And I never like giving answers that basically say, nothing you can do about it, here it is, deal with it.
Mother effer, what? There's a hell of a lot we can do about it. I've got a video. And, he hasn't earned the, there we go. He hasn't earned the letting me leave him with a goofy face on. There's a ton we can do about it. He goes into some accurate details about the obstacles faced, but his conclusion, all wrong. Respectfully, sir, all wrong. We'll get there in a moment. Let's let him continue.
And I never like giving answers that basically say, nothing you can do about it, here it is, deal with it. But gerrymandering, as I said, has been around since the beginning of this country. It is ingrained in who we are, and it sucks. The only way we could get out of this system, and I don't even know if this is truly possible because of states' rights, but it would have to be some kind of constitutional amendment that created, an anti-gerrymandering board to redraw the districts in the states. But again,
simultaneously right and wrong. Wrong. That's not the only thing we can do about it. And the addition of what we can do about it was just included in his own intro there. So let's start with what was right about it. Yeah, we could do a constitutional amendment. And in fact, I included in the video. pressuring your senators to push for federal level or constitutional level changes that would stop gerrymandering. There are federal laws we could put in place. Yes, they would be challenged in court, but it would be a start. And certainly, it would force the debate into the forefront. It is not necessarily a left or right issue. It is simply a form of corruption that is taken advantage of more by the right these days. But in my own state, in Michigan, which is a great example, you had people, blue and red, voting to have a bipartisan commission establish the districts. And to assume that that is a fight that only the left will pick up, I think is just inherently flawed. You got to pitch it to the right, sure, but it's not a hard pitch. Hey, draw the lines fairly. Let's come up with a system for that. Then the other part, the fact that he mentions it as a states' rights issue. I'm not thrilled with that phrase, but I get what he's saying. It's an issue of the state's ability to govern itself to some degree. Okay, good. You just identified the battleground on which this is fought. So do it. Case in point, Michigan. From 2012 till 2020, till 2022, we had Republican Congress in our state, or a Republican legislature. Yet, for every voting year except one, it was primarily in favor of Democrats. So what happened in 2020? Well, we redrew the districts because we passed a rule at the state level that defined how we would draw the districts, and we were going to do it fairly. And it worked, and you can do it. And in the description, I have links to guides to help you with this, multiple guides. I also have a link to the video which sums up those guides. And in that video, there's even more simplified links. You can click on one, get started, but it boils down to this: contact your representative. Tell them you want them to support this. In other words, organize politically. Just make your voice heard to your representative. You want to keep it simple? It's as simple as that. Tell your representative, I would like an IRC, an Independent Redistricting Commission. How do you know if you need to do that? Check the link. There is a database of every state and whether or not it has such a thing. If you already have, as part of the way your state draws districts, independent redistricting commissions, you're good. Don't waste your energy fighting for that. However, if the commissions are decided, or rather, if the districts are decided by the legislature in your state, that's a problem. It's right at the top in those links. If you click on them, you go to your state, it's right at the top who decides what the commissions are. And if it's the people that get elected by those districts, that's a problem. Tell your representative you want an independent redistricting commission. You want to hear them advocating for it. That is what you can do. You can do something. Tisk, Farron. I do want to hear a little bit more because I just like his presentation style. And also, I can't stress enough, he does normally knock it directly out of the park.
And I don't even think you could get that done because the states do have the authority under the Constitution itself to do this on their own without the federal government getting to look over their shoulders in many instances. So a constitutional amendment to undo that is the only possible remedy. You know, you couldn't pass a law through Congress. It's going to get tossed out as unconstitutional due to states' rights. You could do it state by state.
I do think, and I will admit, I'm splitting hairs on this one. or on this particular point. But I do think you could set out standard rules for redistricting that follow the Constitution. Because in the Constitution, we also discuss what the purpose of all of this is. And it is supposed to be by the people, for the people. So if it is done in an unfair way, I think it would benefit us to clarify what is fair and unfair at a federal level. But he's probably right that it would get challenged in court. I just don't agree that case would be lost. And even if that case was lost, where do we end up? Right back where we are. Right back where we are. So I just don't agree with any of his conclusions on this.
But then again, you have this patchwork thing, kind of like we had with COVID restrictions, I think is a great way to look at it. So if your state over here, they've gotten rid of gerrymandering, they've got this panel that gets to draw the districts and everything's even, nothing gets to look weird. Great. But the state next to you, they don't want to do it. So they're going to stay gerrymandered. On the other side of you, that state says same thing. We're not going to do it. So what good is having one non-gerrymandered state when you've got 49 others who say, hey, good for you, state, but we're not going to pay attention. We're not going to follow suit. So
wait a minute. What good is it? If you just got one state to vote fairly, what good is it? I'll tell you. In my state, where that just happened, here's how it's good. We now have fair representation. It makes a huge difference. Why is the House of Representatives for 49% Democrats instead of 46%, 45%? Michigan just fixed. Just this election cycle is benefiting from the fix that it put in place to make fair districts. It makes a huge difference. And the idea that you can't get a knockout shot in one blow does not mean you shouldn't throw a couple of jabs in this boxing match. That's just I don't know why he's on this I don't know why he arrived at this conclusion other than to be as generous as possible, because I will stress that nearly every other video I've watched of Farron Cousins has been wonderful. And in fact, I even recommend subscribing to the guy. So to be as fair as possible, he could be making an argument here that your energy is better spent elsewhere. But even if that was the argument he was making, I would disagree with it, because, my gosh, talk about an effort multiplier. What an uphill battle it is if you have to not only win, but win by a massive margin. You have to win by more points. Imagine a basketball game where the other team wins if you don't get at least 10 more points than them. It would behoove you. It would behoove you indeed. In fact, a basketball tournament where the other team wins if you don't get 10 more points than them. It would behoove you to get that rule undone against every team that you play. But if you can't accomplish that, getting that rule undone against as many of the teams as you play as that you are going to play as possible is also in your interest. So I really do think that this is worth your time. And in fact, I would recommend you look at that list, link in the description, and get to it. If your state, even if your state tends to vote blue, by the way, if your state, and you'll find most blue voting states do not do this, but if your state decides the districts in their state legislature, switch that to an independent redistricting commission. Plain and simple. I would normally want to finish out Farron Cousins, play the whole video, but I don't want to keep dunking on the guy. The point is made. There is a link to his video if you want to watch the whole thing in the description. And given that it's a 2 for Tuesday, we're going to wrap up pretty soon here. Real Bill P says Farron lives in Florida in Matt Gates' district. I believe he has lost hope. Oh my gosh, yeah, that poor guy. He's got to be struggling. I sympathize, man. Oh well, he'll get him tomorrow. We're going to be back in just about 1 hour. I'm going to upload this, do some calisthenics, maybe some of these, a couple of these. And we're going to keep 2 for Tuesday going. Thank you so much for joining me on this stream. I'll see you in a minute. And here's a fitting outro. Oh, by the way, this is WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do.
Yeah,